used to live way out in the middle of nowhere with my aunt and cousin for about 5 years. It can get pretty creepy at night. The town we were closest to only had a pre-K through 12th grade school, post office, church, a tag agency, a notary. We lived about 6 or 7 miles away from and went to school there. Most of the homes are miles apart. We didn't even have bus stops. Each student was picked up at their house. Parents whose children rode the bus had to pay a fee for gas because my bus rides lasted as long as 3 hours every day. That's how rural this area is and covered in woods and rivers. There's lots of wildlife. There had been a wildfire burning in a neighboring county for the past couple of days, destroying acres of forest, forcing wildlife to flee. We had to be extra cautious when driving because deer were everywhere. You couldn't drive long without seeing one. It wasn't uncommon to spot fellow motorists stranded after a deer incident. There was almost always blood-splattered trucks sitting at the gas station. My cousin and I were going home, and we were using her truck to help a friend move a pool table, and we ended up staying and playing pool until a little before 4. We hadn't been drinking or anything, just hanging out. We were driving down this old dirt road. Over the trees in the distance, we could see smoke from the burning wildfire against the night sky. A big buck ran out in front of us, causing my cousin to hit the brakes, and then something much bigger ran out after it and grabbed the deer. It happened so fast and my eyes were locked on the buck, I didn't get a good look at whatever was after it. We hit the ass end of whatever it was and went spinning. The truck crashed into a small ditch on the side of the road, sending dust everywhere. It wasn't very serious and neither of us were hurt, but it knocked the battery cables loose. We both pulled out our cell phones, but of course, no signal. We weren't surprised. Neither of us mentioned what we hit and got out to attempt to open the hood, but we couldn't reach the front to unlock it because the front of the truck was wedged against the dirt and sitting angled downhill. There wasn't much we could do. So we walked up the road searching for a signal and using our phones as flashlights. And then we saw the deer laying beside the road. It'd been gutted. There was a huge ragged hole in its belly and its intestines were strung out for a few feet in the direction of the woods. This was a very large deer. We immediately decided, fuck this shit, got back in the truck and waited for a passing car. I rationalized that we must have hit the deer or something, but she knew we didn't. We hit something else. We got lucky and after about only 10 minutes we see headlights. It could sometimes take hours for another car to pass by on these back roads. As soon as they got close, we flagged down the driver and told him what happened. He told us he was heading out for an early morning hunting trip. He wasn't in a rush and offered to try and pull out the truck for us and showed a big dent he had from when he hit the deer a few days before, which started a conversation about all our wildlife animal refugees. He told him about the deer and asked him if he knew what type of animal could do that, and he decided to take a look. We walked him to it, but it wasn't in the same place and it wasn't a whole deer anymore. It had been ripped to shreds. Most of its bones were intact with strips of flesh still attached. It was a horrifying sight, mangled and bent in odd and unsettling ways. He said, "Holy shit, that's a 12-point buck." We asked if he thought a mountain lion could do that kind of damage in 10 minutes and he replied, "Maybe," very unconvincingly, and suggested just giving us a ride home, coming back for the truck when it's light out. He gave us his number to help pull the truck out later that day, but we had our uncles do it. We didn't want to bother him anymore. There was a bunch of black fur stuck in the grill but no blood. Our uncles just brushed off the story as an overreaction. They never saw the deer. When I tell this story to people, they always say it was a werewolf or a skinwalker, but F all that. The only logical thing I can think of is a black bear. They don't live in that area, but there are some in the state. They rarely property on deer, but it has happened. Someone could have owned it and it got loose. People have weird pets around here. There's a family pet's kangaroo that got loose and it made front page of the newspaper. Never heard anything about a bear though. When I picture what I saw in my head, it doesn't look like a black bear, but my mind could just be playing tricks on me. It never made any sound at all when we hit it or when it was eating the deer. Nature can get pretty loud out there at night, but we would have heard an animal that big had it made noise. It was all just so bizarre and creepy. Driving through Virginia on the second day of a 4-day road trip, I remarked to my family that it was odd we hadn't seen another RV of our dated make so far this trip. 2 minutes later, one comes along the other way. And then I said, you know, we haven't seen any deer on this trip. Go around a bend and there's about 6 of them grazing in a glade by the roadside. Okay. I'm on a roll now. Okay then, we haven't seen Santa Claus on this trip. It was July. 5 minutes later, there's a billboard with Santa touting the Christmas store. So I said, we haven't seen $1 million, and that was the end of my lucky streak. I have another story, also driving through Virginia on I-81, different year, same long route. Before I continue, you need to know that in non-Reddit life, I have an unusual name that's hard to spell. I was feeling very depressed about life in general and rather aggravated in specifics. Needed a restroom stop and there aren't many along that stretch. And my dear, dear husband has an amazing ability to pull into the grodiest gas stations. True to form, the one he pulled into took the cake. No name brand gas, filthy dirty, but I was ready to take what I could get. I head into the restroom stall. Weirdly, it had only one graffiti on the wall saying, God loves and my name. Spelled correctly. Nobody, except God apparently, ever spells it correctly, even some family members. I took a picture and laughed the entire rest of the trip. That was a funny one. Around 95 to 97, I was driving to Michigan to visit family. I live in Kentucky. I normally like to drive on long distance trips like that during the midnight hours because there's less traffic. Passengers usually sleep, which makes for longer hauls in between stops. And quite frankly, I don't like dealing with other people and drivers. There was one big stretch of the road going up through Ohio, or maybe Indiana. Can't exactly remember. I was going fine and nothing out of the ordinary. I then start noticing a bright light up ahead. I wasn't sure if it was another vehicle or a gas station, but I thought it seemed a lot brighter than usual. As I kept driving, I could tell it was moving and was getting bigger and bigger. I wake my cousin and tell him to check it out. We're both staring as it is clearly moving closer and becoming more brighter and more larger with every passing second. Then suddenly it seemed as if it instantaneously just flew directly over our heads and felt as if it was only a few feet above the car. It never made a sound but was moving ridiculously fast, and for lack of a better description, was just like a bright white ball of fire. I watched it move out of the distance through my rearview mirror. Hands down the craziest thing I've ever seen in my life. My friend and myself were on a road trip. Part of the road trip took us just north of San Francisco and just south of the area where the Zodiac was supposed to live. For some reason, our mapping program freaked out and took us on a long way back to our campsite. The road runs through the mountains and is 1.5 lanes wide, meaning that if there's another car coming at you on one of the tight curves, one of you will have to stop, reverse to a slightly wider point, and let the other car pass. Sure enough, we get to talking about the Zodiac, you know, college kids trying to freak each other out. This was a long time ago, but we'd be doing the same thing if it were today. On cue, we run into another car. Doesn't turn its high beams off, blinding us. We kidded each other that it was the Zodiac, blinding us so that he could take us out before we knew what was happening. I reversed to let the car pass, He drives by. It was just a harmless man with his kids in the back. Then I see a flash out of the corner of my eye. I look over at my friend to ask if he saw it too, and he was open-mouthed staring in the same direction. Today we have no idea if it was our minds playing tricks or not, but he got a much better look than I did. Both of us swear we saw a man running off through the forest wearing what? A dark blue jacket. We both figured we were just seeing things, but neither of us ever fully gave it up to a creation of our mind. When I was 19, my best friend and I, he's a guy and I'm a girl, road tripped around the west coast for a few weeks of the summer. When we hit Humboldt, we set up camp in a state park, then decided to cruise back to town to get some pizza and see if we could spot anyone who looked like they could sell us some bud. After dinner, finding no one and feeling like dorks, we started driving back and, on an exit ramp, spotted a woman with her thumb out. She was so nondescript it was impossible to get a read on her. Somewhere between the ages of 25 to 35. Straight brown hair, brown pants, and a plain blue sweater. Possibly because we were bummed out that the afternoon was ending without any memorable pot-buying shenanigans, we picked her up. She said her name was Trish. She had these very hollow eyes. She spoke very quietly. She carried a small brown leather suitcase, and she asked where we were going. We told her. We asked her where she was headed, and she said, "Oh, I think I'll get a ride into the park with you. I won't sleep in your tent or anything," she assured us. We had a 2-person tent and obviously didn't want a stranger in it with us. We couldn't offer that, it was awkward. We had leftover pizza in the back seat, told her to help herself. She ate it all, quickly and quietly, like she hadn't eaten all day. Get to the campsite, awkward. She asks what time we're leaving in the morning. We tell her 10. She nods and says she will see us then, turns and walks into the woods, disappears. We go to bed, no idea where she is or if she's coming back. In the morning she appears minutes after we get up and start moving around, making oatmeal on the camp stove. She does not look as if she spent a sleepless night in the woods. She looks exactly the same, not a hair out of place, not a pine needle stuck to her sweater. She observes our oatmeal, then disappears again. She returns shortly with 2 hands full of blackberries. This is a crowded campsite and the blackberry bushes are picked clean. My friend and I spent a good half hour foraging the day before and found 3 berries total. We put the berries in the oatmeal and we all eat. Pack up, get in the car, ask where she wants us to drop her off. She tells us to take her back to the very spot where we picked her up. It's not the direction we're going, but it's not far. She looks very sad. She thanks us and she gets out. We wish her well and she says something like, "I doubt it." There was something spooky about the whole thing, but more than that, it was just really sad. I drive a pretty decent stretch of back roads between my home and my university quite frequently. It's like an hour and a half of nothing but farms and trees. Late at night, on a particular desolate stretch of road, I noticed some flickering lights way ahead of me. As I sped closer, the lights grew more intense until it was pretty bright glowing. When I was close enough to see what was going on, I saw a bunch of cars and trucks parked off to the side of the road, and a huge fire burning in the trees about 30 meters from the road. I stopped, checking out the amazing bonfire. The stack of trees and logs was like 10 or 15 feet high, and the flames were easily double that. The fire was so bright that it was hard to look at for longer than a couple of seconds, but I could see people moving around just inside the trees. They were packing up chairs and tents and running back and forth between their camp and vehicles, obviously bailing. A mammoth of a man got out of one of the trucks and started waving his hands at me. I tensed up, wondering if I'd stumbled upon the wrong kind of party, but the guy just told me it would be best to move on as the fire was likely to spread. I realized that the fire had probably started out much smaller and burned out of control. Later that week, on my way back, a huge swath of woods had burned down. There was still fire and rescue milling around, but it looked as if the flames were all the way out. I still don't know if the people I had seen were caught or owned up to starting a forest fire. Luckily, it hadn't spread for more than a few hundred square feet before it was extinguished. Not a trucker, but once went on a trip to Dallas with my mother. Not sure where we were exactly. It was about midday though. Traffic was almost stopped on the freeway, and I was looking at one of those pedestrian overpasses. You know, the ones that are fenced on the sides and are just for people to walk over. I noticed it from a distance, and it looked like someone was standing on it, dressed in white. As we got closer, I realized that whoever it was had been duct taped to the fence with his arms out at his sides like he was crucified. He looked black, maybe Middle Eastern, with a white robe and white turban. A black bag sat next to him on the concrete. He stopped a few feet from the bridge because traffic wasn't moving, and I'm fairly certain it wasn't a mannequin, but if it was a damn good one. My mother looked just as freaked out as I did, and I kept glancing back at it as we drove off. One night about 6 months ago, I was driving my sister home, and to get to her house I have to drive 15 miles highway and 6 miles back roads. It's 1 in the morning and I had just dropped her off when I'm at a stop sign waiting to turn out. I see the first set of headlights I had seen since leaving my house. I didn't think anything of it and got on the highway. This is where it got messed up. There are no lights on this highway, just country and the glow of headlights. The dude pulls up right beside me like he's going to pass but just drives alongside me. I speed up, he speeds up. I had finally had enough and rolled my window down and gave him the finger, but I'm shocked at what I see when I roll down my window to look over. It's a guy. All the lights on his old box van, with his eyes open so wide and his mouth open as wide as it can with all of his teeth showing, and he had an old Polaroid instant camera. He kept taking pictures of me because I literally couldn't get away. He finally slammed on my brakes and he kept driving, and I got his license plate number and reported it, but the cops just chalked it up to kids playing pranks. Yeah, right. I'll go for one that we just couldn't explain. I was riding shotgun in a car with my ex and her sister on a stretch of road with only marshland and forest around in pouring rain. I remember so clearly being asked if I liked INXS, and I said I didn't really listen to them, but to go ahead because I always liked finding new music, so she put them on. I think we were driving really far to get to a mall or something, I can't really remember. Coming down a hill, we saw a man walking towards us, kind of off to the passenger side of our lane, bawling his head off. He had a briefcase above his head to shield him and was dressed in a full nice suit. As we got closer, I noticed that instead of a dress shirt, he had an INXS shirt tucked into his dress pants. He was older and not homeless. I got the impression of a rich man. We just drove by and nobody but me noticed the shirt. Just commented on how weird it was a guy was just in the middle of nowhere, but I thought that was really freaky. We didn't see any breakdowns or somewhere he could have came from for an hour in either direction. Also, he was dry. Thinking back to it, he wasn't wet either. He would have been muddy all over out in that storm, but he was very much dry. Once my friends and I were driving back from the nearest decent-sized city to our crappy little hometown in rural Tennessee. Now I had an older car, but it was in fairly good shape. No real issues aside from some carburetor problems occasionally. There were probably 4 or 5 of us in the car. One of my friends had recently read some novel where a character says, well, Jesus, Buddha, and a bag of chips. Being wise-ass teenagers, we thought it was hilarious for some reason. We kept coming up with various combinations of blasphemous words in the same vein as the original. After a few minutes of this, suddenly all the lights in the car just cut off, inside and outside. Nothing else was affected, just the lights. Then just as suddenly, they came back on. Obviously, we chalked this up to chance. I had never had that happen in my car before, but it's not something that can't be reasonably explained. After a few minutes of nervous laughter, the blasphemy resumed. Again, the lights shut off, and now I was worried. I thought something was really wrong with the car. My friends accused me of turning off the lights. I hadn't, and convinced them of it. Again, the lights came back on. Now, I'm an atheist currently, and at that time was a pretty cynical Christian. I didn't put much faith in the thought that our banter was pissing God off, so he was sending a message. But still, sometimes you don't tempt faith, right? Well, you aren't me then. Much to the dismay of my friends, I decided to give it one more try. I don't remember the exact phrase, but let's assume it wasn't something you'd say to your grandmother. No sooner had the last syllable rolled off my tongue than the lights cut off for good. This time long enough to force me to pull over and turn off the car. We all sat silently, pondering what had just happened. One of my more religious friends said a little prayer in the back seat. I kept my cynical mouth shut this time. Eventually I started the car and the lights came on just like normal. We rode the rest of the way home in silence. I never had a problem with anything electrical in that car after that night. The battery even lasted a couple more years until I sold it. Not a truck driver, but it happened on an early morning vacation drive. My wife and I were traveling on I-40 from Oklahoma to Ohio, stopping in Tennessee to see some family. We left at midnight, something we hadn't done on a road trip before. As we're in Arkansas, we're winding through a hilly area. It all happened quite fast as we were probably traveling around 70 miles per hour. I swear I saw a wolfman type creature. I say wolf as it appeared to be a large dog-shaped thing with a pointed snout, and I say man because it was running across the road on two legs. It moved right to left, and time seemed to slow down as I barely missed hitting him with my car as I passed him on the driver's side. I looked over at my wife and she looked at me, wondering what the hell we just saw. Was it just too early in the morning? It was about 6 hours into the trip, sunlight barely coming out over the hills. We haven't spoken this to anyone, with assumptions of no one believing us, but this is Reddit. What the hell? Not a trucker, and my story isn't spooky as such, but it was plenty scary to me. This is about the night I spent in a jungle that is home to tigers. I was born and raised in India, happened almost 30 years ago. I had just turned 18, my dad gave me a new motorbike. It was my summer break. I decided to take a road trip up into the Himalayan foothills. The Himalayan foothills are part of the Terai forests, huge hills which could be called mountains if they weren't sitting next to the Himalayas, densely forested. And I don't mean gentle European forest, I mean tropical jungle. You need ropes and machetes to get through parts. I was exploring an area where 3 of these mountain ranges intersect. The Mailani, Chilkia, and Dima ranges, part of which happen to lie inside the Corbett National Park, which is one of the tiger preserves of northern India. It's not just tigers, the same forests also have leopards, wild elephants, bears, jackals and hyenas, monkeys, and huge pythons that kill and eat deer, and crocodiles along the Kosi and Ramganga rivers below. So one evening I rode my bike up a little dirt track on the hillside to get to a little promontory up there for a better view. Sat down to enjoy the view and smoke a cigarette, and while I was doing that, my bike slipped the kickstand on the uneven ground and went sliding down into a ditch about 15 feet deep. That's how I ended up spending the night in the jungle. I had left it late in the day with only a couple hours of light left because of the forest lodge where I planned to spend the night that wasn't too far. but without the bike there was absolutely no chance of getting anywhere. I used what daylight was left to trek down the hill and get back to the main road on the off chance that someone driving by might help me, but it was a slim hope. The road is actually a dirt track and there's no traffic on it after dark. So imagine this. This road was about 15 to 20 feet wide. On both sides the land had been cleared for another 50-ish feet. Beyond that was jungle. You actually can't see past the first couple rows of trees, it's too dense. For the first few hours after sunset, there was a thin crescent moon, but around midnight even that set, and then it was pitch dark for the rest of the night. I sat down in the middle of the road trying to keep as far as I could from the jungle on both sides. I had a tiny flashlight, useless beyond half a dozen feet. Had my cigarette lighter, but no dry wood to make a fire. First few rains of the monsoon had already come and everything was damp. I didn't dare go into the jungle to search for dry wood. I couldn't see a damn thing, but I could hear the noises. Goddamn, the jungle is loud and scary at night. All sorts of birds and animals calling, squeaking, grunting, rustling. Twice that night I heard tigers call. Fortunately, they seemed far away. At least half a dozen times that night I heard langurs giving their alarm cries. These are monkeys, and they have an early warning system of cries and calls to warn each other of danger. Leopards find them tasty. So every time they call, it's a shock to the system. Is there a leopard hunting them nearby, or a big python? Or are the buggers just confused or cranky? Who knows? You can't see anything beyond a few feet anyway. But big cats have much better night vision than I do, and could probably see me if they came close and smell me from much farther away. That felt like the longest night I've spent in my life. I was too scared to sleep. In the morning, a jeep with a forest guard drove by. He heard my story, then went back and sent a few villagers to help. They dragged my bike out from the ditch with ropes and I went on my way. But I'm not going to forget that night in the jungle. Not a trucker, but in the late 90s I took a day trip over to Naples, Florida, with a friend of mine who was interviewing with their fire department and asked me if I would accompany him. We'd been traveling down Alligator Alley for several hours when we passed what appeared to be several dozen white shirts hanging in the cypress trees on the opposite side of the road. Intrigued by this, we made a note of their location, and on the return trip later that afternoon made it a point to pull over and take a closer look. It was pretty weird. Someone had taken about 30 identical white pressed dress shirts and hung them at various heights throughout the cypress trees, which were standing in at least 4 feet of stagnant swamp water. The shirts were being held up in the trees by some kind of makeshift hanger composed of sticks, rather giving it a Blair Witch feel. While a few of the shirts had picked up some dirt, it was clear that at some point they had been bleached white and starched thoroughly. At one point my friend tossed a rock at one and it bounced off with a loud thud. We stood there looking at this display with a growing sense of unease, wondering what it meant and who had taken the trouble to travel out in the middle of nowhere to wade out into several feet of gator-infested waters to hang shirts in trees. In the waning hours of daylight it seemed even creepier. Between the eeriness factor and the mosquitoes, we decided to return to the car and drove off discussing our finding. We decided it was perhaps some kind of memorial to someone killed on the road, or perhaps something more sinister, like a ritual of some sort. Through the years, I have read other reports of similar displays being sighted on other remote roadways throughout the country. A few years ago, I happened to be traveling on Alligator Alley again and did not notice the display. Wish we had been able to get a picture of it. My boyfriend and I moved into this apartment just outside the city about 2 months ago. It's nothing to write home about. The building is over 100 years old. No elevator, and the roofing in the hallways is peeling off more and more every day. The unit itself is updated and modern, and the rent was reasonable, so we figured it would just be fine. It's on a main road with everything we need and a subway station within walking distance. Plus, it's allowed pets, so I could have my dog. All good things. When we first moved in, I didn't spend much time at the apartment during the day because my schedule was pretty jam-packed. My boyfriend was waiting to start a new job, so he was home quite a bit. He kept telling me over and over that he thought our apartment was haunted, but I never got that vibe. I used to work in a psychiatric facility that was chock full of ghosts, so I've seen my fair share of shadows and heard disembodied voices on numerous occasions. This did not feel like a haunted place. So when weird things started happening, I naturally brushed them off with logic. We were in an apartment building with other people in their own units, so knocks and bangs were expected. When stuff started falling off shelves and counters, I attributed it to an uneven floor. The TV going haywire? Must just be cables or connection. We just moved in, the TV needs time to adapt too, I suppose. The curtains in the shower started moving on their own, so they must be from a draft, even though the windows are sealed shut since we are on the top floor. A couple weeks in, I would randomly feel something touch the back of my head. The first time it happened, I was laying on my side in the bedroom. I figured it was a pillow or some other thing in the bed, even though I was laying on top of the covers completely still, except for my fingers which were scrolling my phone. The second time it happened, I was standing in the kitchen filling up a glass of iced tea. This time it must have been a bug. The third time, I felt a tap on the back of my head. I was sitting on my sofa, as I am now, trying to get the TV to listen to the remote. I brushed it off, no use in upsetting myself. Then came the problems with my dog. I was sitting on the couch with him one evening while my boyfriend was out with some friends. My dog suddenly shot up and began staring at the corner of the ceiling in my living room, towards where the bathroom is. After a few seconds, he started to lowly growl at the ceiling. I tried to nudge him to get him to focus off of that area, but he would not budge. He just kept growling at the ceiling. I was getting more freaked out, so I distracted him with some treats and he stopped. I took a video of my dog doing this and sent it to a friend who suggested that there may be mice or a bird that could have landed on the roof and set him off. Although I still didn't feel right because my dog had never done that before, I definitely was not prone to growling. I kept brushing it off as just that, something he could hear but I couldn't. Another day I came home early in the afternoon. I was startled when I heard someone call from the living room saying, "Oh, hello." My boyfriend had just started his new job. I was not expecting him to be home. I called back out, "Oh, hey, I'm home early." At this point, I also noticed my dog had not run up to greet me. As I was taking my shoes off, I asked, "Where's Max?" My boyfriend did not answer. I figured he had his headset on as he does when he is gaming. I walked through the living room doorway expecting my boyfriend to be sitting on the couch, but no one was there. Next, I checked the bedroom. No one. The bathroom? Empty. No one was in my apartment. I found my dog hiding under the bed, something he only does during thunderstorms or when a neighbor is setting off fireworks. But it was a sunny afternoon. Why was my dog hiding under the bed? I grabbed a knife from the kitchen and searched my apartment, but I found no one. I called my boyfriend at work to tell him what happened and asked him to come home as soon as possible. When he got home, he rechecked the apartment and also found nothing. It's not a huge apartment, so it's not hard to miss a person hiding. We debated calling the police, but it seemed there was no point. Maybe this time I could have attributed to another unit or people talking down the street, but that did not feel right. The voice was so clear and sounded so close. To give some context, I did not know the person who had rented the unit before me, which I'd say is normal. Her mail was in our unit's mailbox when we first moved in. I took note of her name, Taylor White. and the fact that her mail had a forwarding address hadn't written on it. I did not think to remember the exact address, but saw that the forwarding address was just a small town, maybe 2 hours away from the city. I could have been nosy and looked her up just for fun, but I was so busy with other things that I did not have time to bother. The mail sat in our mailbox for a while until I ran into the mailman one day and convinced him to take it with him. I met the 2 other neighbors on my floor sporadically. At first, it was just in passing and exchanging names and pleasantries. I asked them to let us know if we were ever being too loud or maybe if our dog is barking too much, because we want to be good neighbors. The man that lived next to us, Josh, commented that we were fine so far. He explained that the walls between the apartments are pretty thick since it's an old building, so the only time he ever hears anyone else is when he is walking in the hallway. I agreed that I had noticed that as well, but just wanted to be curious. We ran into Josh in the hallway one day, and he asked about a video game he heard us playing the night before. At first we were apologetic, though Josh was only asking because he too enjoyed the game. We invited him over for some beers and video games the next night. Out of pure curiosity, I asked Josh if he was also friendly with the previous tenant. He explained that he would see her in passing, but that she seemed quiet and reserved, so they never had a conversation past, "Hello, how are you doing today?" But Josh did have a weird anecdote he wanted to share. He said that the previous tenant had moved out suddenly and in the middle of the night. He only knew this because the movers had woken him up at midnight as they were carrying her things out, which he thought was odd. He had come out and asked them to be quieter, for which they apologized and agreed that they would try to keep it down. After that, he noticed that there were eviction notices on her doorway. So his conclusion is that she up and left and stopped paying her rent. I don't know what Emma did with her life, but we never talked about it. Maybe she was in trouble, he said. That caught me off guard. Emma? I asked. The mail in our mailbox was addressed to Taylor, but Josh knew her as Emma. I was starting to have a lot of questions about this place. Here comes the kicker. Our bathtub started clogging almost as soon as we moved in. We were going through Drano faster than normal. Sometimes if we showered for too long, a rotten stench would come up from the drain. We decided to bite the bullet and hire a professional to snake the drain, thinking that there must be some really bad clog in there. So he comes and my boyfriend and I sit out on the couch while he does his business. Whatever was in there was probably super gross and I had no intentions of seeing it. You guys might want to see this, I heard him call out. At first, we protested. No one wants to see gross crap in their drains. No, seriously, he said. You need to see this. I volunteered my boyfriend because I knew I would not be able to stomach it. I heard a round of explicitive words coming from him next. They murmured between themselves and eventually my boyfriend rejoined me on the couch. I think he just found bones in our drain. My ears started to ring as I could feel my body go cold. A lump started to form in my throat and I thought I might throw up. Against better judgment, I went to see what the plumber had found. Amid wet, matted clumps of hair were solid white pieces of something. I stumbled out of the bathroom afraid I would pass out. My boyfriend and the plumber agreed it was best to call the police. They came and took the grotesque mess of hair and bones away, noting that while it did look like human remains, they would run the test to confirm. Now I'm just waiting for results, waiting for the call, waiting for what will happen next. I've thought about moving out, finding a hotel or something, but the money is tight. I can't afford to break the lease and certainly not stay in a hotel for an extended amount of time. A thought runs through my mind. Where's the rest of the body? Images of a corpse sitting in the walls constantly play in my head. It's almost as though I can feel someone over my shoulder now, watching me wherever their bones may rest. Someone tapping me on the back of my head trying to get my attention, crying out for me to find them, hidden in my apartment. Something in my house keeps opening doors while I sleep. I had initially brushed it off when I woke up that first morning and was greeted with the sight of my bedroom door wide open. My bed faced that door, and to avoid looking at the dark hallway that led from the room, I always closed it before going to sleep. So it did come as a surprise to me to find it open in the morning. But I could have not closed the door all the way last night. Then the draft from the AC managed to nudge it, and then the hinge caused the door to swing all the way open. It was reasonable. So I went about my day as per usual. Soon again it was nighttime, only this time I made sure to close my bedroom door until I heard the slight click of the lock sliding into place. Morning came once again, and as any other day besides yesterday, I woke up to my closed bedroom door. I got up, dressed for work, and headed into my living room. The door to my pantry was open. Not cracked open or half open, but so completely wide open that the door was resting as far as it could go on the connected wall. Last night, I had gone out to eat with some friends, so I know that I wasn't hungry in the evening and wouldn't have gone into the pantry. But maybe I left it open that morning when I left for work. I had gone in there yesterday morning and was a bit rushed, so I could have left it open. It was reasonable. Still, I forced myself to go about my day unfazed. The next morning, the door to my guest bedroom was wide open. I never went in there since I barely ever had guests, and only about once every few months did I go in there to clean it. However, I happened to stop by that room the other day to grab some extra sheets. Since I rarely go down that hallway, never mind look down it every day, I could have left it open when I grabbed the sheets and didn't realize that I didn't close the door all the way. It was reasonable. The next day passed by in a paranoid blur. I kept checking over my shoulder, never quite focusing on what I was doing at work. Sleep didn't seem like it would come easy, so I downed a few melatonins and was out. Early next morning, I shut off my alarm and sulked about getting ready. I was still a little drowsy from the pills, but nonetheless headed out of the bedroom without delay. I was met with a slight breeze as I went further into my house. I rubbed my arms as the house seemed to grow colder and colder as I made it to the living room. My feet froze as I took sight of my front door completely open. Now, I knew that I definitely did not leave the front door to my house unlocked and wide open. The only logical conclusion was that someone must have broke in, stolen some valuables I had. I phoned 911, texted my boss that I would be late, and waited for the cops to arrive. They came shortly after and immediately set to work. They investigated everything in my house, from my front door to my bedroom. I sat on my living room sofa the entire time, and once they had finished, they came to join me in the conjoined love seats across. Now, the memory of the conversation is slightly fuzzy, but it went as follows almost exactly. "Miss," one of the officers began, "did you notice any valuables of yours missing? Any jewelry or maybe some money?" I had shaken my head, saying, "No, I don't keep much cash in the house, and only expensive jewelry I have is my wedding ring." Last night I had fallen asleep with it on, since most days I couldn't bear to take it off even though Philip and I were divorced. It remained on my finger even now as I typed this out. "There doesn't seem to be any forced entry," the other officer began, clasping his hands in front of him. "Heck, I'd even go on to say that whoever opened that front door had a key. Are you sure you closed it last night?" Yes, I sat up straight in my seat, annoyed that these officers would accuse me of such. You think that I wouldn't make sure my own front door was closed before going to sleep? One of the officers held a hand up, gesturing for me to take it easy. "Ma'am, we're just saying, there is not a single sign of robbery. Nothing is missing or indicates a break-in." He put the hand down. "Does anyone else have keys to your house?" "No one, just me. I bought this place after my divorce." "Do you keep a key under the mat outside or any hidden key that remains outside the house that someone could have found?" Both of the officers stood up, signaling that it was time for them to leave. They told me to retrace my steps of last night and to rethink about when I think I closed my front door. Then one of them gave me their card, telling me that I can call them personally if anything else happens, since they are already familiar with my case. They probably thought I was some crazed loon who had gotten drunk and high last night and forgotten to close my door. But I mean, what other explanation is there? Is there even one? I just can't believe that I had slept through the night unaware that my house was wide open for anyone to walk into. I ended up skipping work that day. Something was happening in my house that occurred while I slept, and I was going to get to the bottom of it. I just couldn't brush it off like before. That night, I slipped into bed. I knew that whatever was causing my doors to open only occurred while I slept. Yet when I closed my eyes, sleep wouldn't come. Maybe the fear of this situation was enough to keep me awake. A few hours passed and I may have dozed off because when I checked my clock, it was 2 a.m. This was probably a good time to check on all the doors in my house to see if anything had happened. I went to get out of my bed when something sounded outside my bedroom. It was the slightest creak of a door opening. I froze, my eyes locked on my bedroom door, my body refusing to move. It's probably just the AC nudging a door open. Soft, padded footsteps sounded in the hallway from my bedroom, thumping ever so precisely. They got louder up to the point I feared what sized being would produce that loud of footsteps on carpet. The footsteps continued, increasing in proximity when I heard them outside my bedroom. Someone was in my house. This someone must have been the one opening the doors, keen on the idea of tormenting me. Maybe some homeless person snuck into my house at one point in the last few days. I heard the faint jingle as something latched onto my doorknob, and then it was turning, and my door gave me the slightest creak to let me know that it had been opened. Petrified, I remained completely still. I hastily glanced about my bedroom. I had no windows to escape out of, nothing but my phone, which was resting on my nightstand. I could call the cops, but my door would be completely open any second, and this someone could intervene the call. Who says they're not clutching a knife and prepared to take me down if necessary? This person has been about my house already while I sleep, and I figured if I pretended to be asleep, they should just leave me alone just as they did the previous nights. Immediately, I grabbed my phone, flopped into my bed, and pulled my covers to my chin. The minute I closed my eyes, the door wheezed a slightly larger creak that told me it was all the way open. And then it was just silence. Whoever had opened my bedroom door was just watching me. I forced all emotion from my expression as I pretended to sleep in my bed. My phone was clutched in a death grip against my chest, my entire body going still. Suddenly I felt the hot wisp of someone's breath on my forehead. I shot up my bed, launching myself against my headboard. My eyes were wild, my chest struggling to move so to keep air going in and out at a steady pace. However, the air caught my throat as my entire body froze in place. Once I caught the sight of the thing that was standing at the edge of my bed, right where I had been laying. Its body was overgrown, with a slight hunch in its spine that told me it was taller than originally perceived. And I say it because there were no definable features that led me to think that this thing had a gender. Sure, its body looked humanoid, with 2 arms and 2 legs, but those limbs were long and gangly, with neither arm being of equal length to the other. Its skin was wrinkled in some places, such as around its wrists and chest, but other places it looked stretched out, as if the skin there was being tightly pulled against its bones. Its eyes were 2 holes gouged into its head, deep and sunken in. No eyeballs nor eyelids to showcase how this thing could even see. Above the eye holes was a thin layer of greasy hair strands, dark in color, contrasting to this thing's pale and malformed skin, and below all of that on its face was a thin and dried out mouth, one that slowly stretched into a tight grin, revealing its set of black and decaying teeth. I opened my mouth to scream, but no sound came out. My eyes were frozen on this thing. The creature took a step forward, its legs bumping against the side of my bed. It moved one of their arms backwards before they violently swung it forward. Their clawed hands intended to make purchase in me. I managed to flatten myself out against the headboard, avoiding its swipe. My breath caught in my throat when I waited for them to do so again, since it had missed me the first time. As predicted and uncoordinatedly, the thing swung its arms exactly the same as before. My earlier assumption was correct. This thing, with its sunken-in holes for eyes, must have been blind. I let a ragged breath escape my lips, relieved that I had major advantage over this thing. But the second the breath left my lips, the thing's head snapped up to my exact location, and without a beat, it bent down on its misshapen legs and launched itself at me. By a mere second, I managed to roll over on the bed and hit the floor. I didn't waste another moment and began running, heading straight into my living room. The thing was right behind me, chasing me without so much of a hint of hesitation. It barreled through everything in my house, knocking over my coffee table and a lamp in its desperation to catch me. I sprinted to my front door, which of course was closed now. I snatched the car keys from the hook nearby and heaved the door open. I made it outside onto my porch and I went to slam the door shut to delay the thing, but its engorged foot stopped the door right before it could close. Two clawed hands appeared on the other side of the door, clutching the metal frame. Desperately, I still attempted to close the door when I felt the true strength of this thing as it began to push the door back open. It was way stronger than me, easily opening the door back up despite my opposing force. Quickly, I decided that it was a lost cause, abandoning it, and I dashed to my car. Then I began driving and didn't stop until I was a few hours out of town. The fear in my spine didn't lessen until I stopped by a motel and bought a room for the night. Even now, as I sit in this motel typing away into this website, I pray that someone here knows what to do. I've concluded that the thing must have been living in my house all the time, maybe in my guest room, maybe in my backyard, or maybe even squeezing itself under my bed while I slept. But it must have been looking for me, and each door it left open was an attempt to locate me. The only reason it never found me until now was due to its blindness. It had to be. Otherwise I would be dead now the first night it was in my bedroom. I don't know if that thing is following me or if it can. I don't know that when I do manage to go to sleep, if I'll awake to it standing before me. My motel door wide open. I don't know. And that's what scares me the most. Not my personal experience, but my uncle lives out deep in rural Oregon. He told me this story where he was driving to work really early in the morning to a small town about 30 minutes away. There was a bit of traffic just outside of town, so he stopped behind another car. There was super heavy fog this morning, like Silent Hill quality, really thick, so he could just see the backlights of the car in front of him. After following the car very slowly for a while, the car stops once more in traffic. My uncle sits there and waits for about 20 minutes. The car still hasn't moved. All he can see is the headlights in front of him. Eventually he gets out to see what's the matter. When my uncle gets out and walks to the car in front of him, he sees the entire front of the car completely totaled. Inside was the dead driver. The back part of the car was completely fine, and my uncle did not even know the thing was wrong earlier due to the fog. The story always unsettled me when I had to drive in the fog. I was once driving late from San Antonio to Houston down I-10, probably about midnight. Along this road there's an access road that runs mostly parallel to the interstate and veers off at an overpass every now and then. When the road veers off, the overpass, which is usually tall enough to let tractor trailers through, has a pretty steep incline of dirt and concrete forming the hill. You know what I'm talking about. Anyway, I'm driving down the road sort of caravanning with my friend, except he was about 10 miles back because he stopped at Buc-ee's to get gas, so he was far behind me. I noticed that there is a car driving at the same speed as me on the access road, veering off at every overpass until I can't see him anymore, and then speeding back up and driving alongside me again and again. First, I'm sort of worried because I think it's a cop. I had a gram with me but hadn't gotten a chance to smoke yet. At one point, the car once again veers off and then back parallel with me until he just takes off going well over 100 miles per hour, I'm sure, because I was already going 75 to 80 miles per hour. An overpass was coming and I expected him to veer off again, except he didn't. He just drove straight on and ramped off the overpass, catching what looked like 15 to 20 feet in the air, not to mention the height of the overpass already. I was still behind him, so I lost sight of him on the other side because I hadn't passed under the overpass yet. But when I did pass under, I didn't see anything. Nothing at all. No wreckage, no fire, no trees, bushes, ditches, nothing. It was like it hadn't happened. I pulled off and turned around and looked around the area and I couldn't find any evidence. It's the weirdest thing I ever seen. But the weirder part is my friend told me he saw the same car doing the same thing when he got to that stretch of the road, only he never saw the car commit suicide like I did. I had just merged into I-25 from US 36 in Denver, and even though the speed limit is 55 miles per hour, nobody drives that slow. Because of the amount of traffic that merges on at the next on-ramp, I usually moved over one more lane. I did this as usual, and a silver Pontiac Aztek had let me into the lane. I gave them a thank you wave, and just then the pickup in front of me hits his brakes hard, and so do I. The truck then swerved to the right just in time for me to see the cars in front of him stopped. I swerved to the left while still braking without looking. I missed the car in that lane thankfully, but I looked in my mirror and saw the Pontiac Aztek had clipped one of the cars that was stopped. When it did, it spun and then went into the side of the same car. I called 911 and let them know of the accident, then got off the highway at 58th Avenue and came back around as a witness for the police. When I got back to the site, traffic was stopped and someone had already got out to check on people. I didn't see it right away because of where I parked, but when I got out of my truck, there was a guy standing at the driver's side of the Aztek crying, and he had put his jacket over the driver's head. This person was killed from head trauma when their head hit the window. If only I had not been selfish about traffic merging ahead, this person would have had more stopping room and more distance to react. By the way, I'm not a truck driver, but I do drive around Denver and surrounding areas all day for work. Back in the early mid-1970s, my mother and I lived in the Pacific Northwest. I was about 6 years old. We were on an offbeat road right out of Seattle. Very dark night. No moon and a wisp of fog. We saw a Volkswagen Beetle on the side of the road with their emergency flashers on, and a rather good-looking guy, as my mom describes him, with his arm in a sling waving us down. My mom pulled over, being the kind of woman that would help anybody in need, and he looked normal. Mom rolled down her window and asked if she could help, and the guy asked my mom if she could help him get the last lug nut off his tire so he could change his flat. So my mother introduces herself and he said, "Hello, my name is Ted," and then smiled and looked at me, reached over and shook my hand and asked my name. I think I got the bad vibe as well because I said nothing to him. My mom said something about his smile really made her uncomfortable. Then she noticed that he was missing the passenger seat in his Beetle. So she rolls the window back up and said she would call a tow truck to come help him at the next city, and then speeds away. While looking in the rearview mirror, she sees him taking off the sling and getting back in the Beetle and took off very fast in the opposite direction. So that's the night at 6 years old I shook the hand of Ted Bundy. None of these are trucking stories, but they do involve long commutes on country roads. My sis worked about an hour and a half away from my mom's, where she was temporarily staying, Except this time, which was bad, because she has a bad habit of falling asleep in cars. So on nights that she worked really late, I made her promise to call me and I'd stay up and talk to her until she got home. One night, late, I'm on the phone with her and out of nowhere she starts screaming. She finally gets out some semblance of a sentence telling me there was a girl covered in blood crawling out of a ditch onto the road. She pulls the car back around and jumps out of the car and runs to her, the phone falling out on the ground. I'm still listening. I hear the girl start sobbing and tell her, "Oh God, not you. Not you. I need help. They're coming back. They're coming back for me." My sister, at this point, thinks this girl might have a mental issue because of how frantic and disconnected her thoughts are. But because while she keeps saying she needs help, she doesn't seem to think my sister could help her. In hindsight, I think the girl saw my 5'9", 100-pound sister with her high-pitched voice and thought that they could easily kill her too. From here, besides screaming and broken glass, I can only tell it from her side. She sees this truck pulling up and is about to wave them down when the girl goes crazy and starts clawing and pleading with my sis to run. The truck puts on its brights and two very big men jump out of the car and start walking towards them, making clicking cat-calling sounds, and my sister's blood turns to ice. She reaches over, grabs the girl, because there's no way in hell she's leaving her, and in a whirlwind manages to force her into the car and jump in herself before the men reach the car and start smashing her lights. She speeds off, clipping one of them, and is followed by this truck trying to run her off the road for about half an hour. They only pull away when she reaches a hospital. Inside, the girl was in a panic and wouldn't let my sister leave her with the doctors. She kept saying she was her best friend and repeating her name over and over. From the doctors, my sister learned that this girl was repeatedly raped and then tied up and dragged behind the truck. To add to the creepiness, once my sister got home, she looked at her name tag and remembered that she had left hers at home and had borrowed an ex-employee's tag, Stephanie. And yet, despite my sis saying she didn't recall ever not fearing for her life enough to get to the formalities and exchange names, the girl had called her by her real name. I was driving a shortcut from 29 Palms, California to Albuquerque, New Mexico. 29 Palms is located in the desolate high desert east of LA. The shortcut was all two-lane road through total nothingness, except for passing through Amboy, California. Amboy is a nearly abandoned town, nearly as far below sea level as Death Valley, with a dormant volcano and lava field on one side and a salt flat on the other. It was also at the time the hotspot for satanic group activity. So I was driving by myself in the afternoon, stopped in Amboy and snapped a picture of the city sign just to prove I was there with two friends who dared me to take that route to I-40. I got back in my car and proceeded to drive up into the mountain range between Amboy and I-40. Once I reached the top, I am driving north through a canyon with high grass on both sides of the road. Up ahead, I see some stuff in the middle of the road. As I approach, I slow down to see a red Pontiac Fiero stop sideways across both lanes. Suitcase open with clothes scattered everywhere, and two bodies laying face down in the road, a man and a woman. I stop 100 feet or so away, and the hair on the back of my neck is standing up. Being a Marine, I reach under the seat and pull out a 9mm pistol and chamber around. Something seemed very wrong. It looked too perfect, as if it were staged. An ambush? Was I being paranoid? Something was just wrong. Getting out of the car seemed unthinkable. It was the horror movie move. As I scanned the road, I saw a line I could drive. Past the guy on the road on his left, swerve to the right side of the woman. Behind the Fiero, and I'd be on the other side. I dropped it into first gear, punched it, and drove the line I planned. I passed the back of the Fiero without hitting it or either of the bodies on the road. I continued forward a couple hundred feet and slowed down so I could breathe and let my heart slow down. As I looked up into the rearview mirror, I saw that the two bodies had gotten up to their knees and 20 or so people emerged from the tall grass on either side of the road by the car and the bodies. At that moment, my right foot smashed the gas pedal to the floor and did not let up until I had to slow down for the I-40 East on-ramp. I will never know what would have happened to me had I gotten out of the car to check on the bodies or stopped my car closer to them. Somehow I do not think it would have been good. Sometimes real life can be scarier than a movie. Mid-90s, I went on a road trip with my son, and for some stupid reason decided to take a different route home than the one I had taken previously and was familiar with. Turned out the new route was a super desolate road. I specifically chose to drive in the middle of the night so my son would be sleeping and there'd be less traffic. It's probably 3 a.m. and of course my POS car breaks down. By some luck of the draw, I'm almost right in front of an abandoned roadside market and was able to coast into the parking lot. The windows are all boarded up on the market. Steam is pouring out from under my hood, and it was essentially the start to every single dumb chick breaks down in the middle of nowhere and gets hacked to death movie you've ever seen. All of a sudden I see headlights coming around the bend. I'd been driving on this road for a couple of hours and had seen maybe 2 other vehicles the whole time. A truck drives past, slows down, then I see the reverse lights come on in my rearview mirror. Deliverance banjo music starts to play in my head. The truck pulls up so our vehicles are window to window and I see the driver is an older man and he's just staring at me. Looks like the stereotypical serial killer you visualize. Long, scraggly gray hair, grizzled stubble, sort of crazy eyes. He motions for me to roll down my window. I'm just trying to look anywhere but directly at him and acting like I don't see him and everything's fine and dandy. Oh no, I'm not in any distress. Please ignore the steam coming from my car. I'm good. Thanks anyway. He backs up a little, parks and gets out of his truck and starts walking towards my car. I'm thinking this is where my son and I end up on a news story about bodies being found in the boonies when the snow melts, and he starts yelling, "I'm not going to hurt you. Roll down your window." I keep looking anywhere but at him while trying to give off a strong, "you don't want to fuck with me" vibe. In reality, I'm about shitting my pants. He gives me a disgusted look, walks to his truck and starts digging around. He comes walking back with tools in his hands, and now I'm thinking, oh my god, he's got tools. He's gonna kill me and bust out my teeth and cut my fingers off so I can't be identified. He yells,
"Open the hood.
I'm looking everywhere but at him.
Open the hood, let me see what's wrong."
He's pissed. I'm scared shitless, but I reach down and pop the hood. He opens it and I crouch down so I can see him through a couple of inches where the hood is open. He looks up and we make eye contact and I about die. He looks down and keeps doing whatever he's doing. He goes back and forth between his truck and my car a couple times, bringing more tools, some jug of something and other things I can't make out. After about 15 minutes, he closes my hood and yells at me to start it up. The car sputters a little, turns over, and then seems fine. He yells, "Be careful, there's a lot of weirdos out here." Gets in his truck, gives me one last disgusted look, and drives off. My car made it home. My dad looked it over after I told him the story and deducted the guy had changed a radiator hose. My dad pointed out many times that the chances of me being struck by lightning were probably better than my chances of some random guy in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night happened to be driving around with a radiator hose and the tools to replace it for whatever 10-plus-year-old piece of shit foreign car I'd been driving was. The most disturbing thing that's ever happened to me was on a long drive back to college for my last semester before graduation. I am a night person and was leaving kind of late for the drive but was expecting to get in around midnight. Being that I would be living on my own after school, I was feeling a little bit sentimental as it felt like I was leaving home for the last time. Home was somewhere else now. So it's sunset as I'm driving towards the highway, and there's a beautiful low fog in the fields along the road catching the light. I decide around then that it'd be nice to try a far more scenic back roads route than the typical turnpike stuff, so I decided to cut off towards West Virginia. I stop at a diner, get gas, and then proceed towards the WV line as night falls. This is the last human contact I make for the rest of the drive. I didn't foresee it, but an immense dense fog dropped over Appalachia that night, slowing my drive considerably. At some points in the mountains, there was a scarcely 10 or 15 feet visibility, but there are some small towns the road leads me through. It's Friday night though, and it begins to feel oddly dead in each town I pass through. It'd be 9 or 10 p.m. and the local bars would look closed. There were no lights on in any of the houses. I felt uneasy, but maybe that's just how it is there. Anyway, I'm making terribly slow progress with the fog and the back roads at night. Deer sightings keeping my foot a little light when the fog wasn't too bad. But at some points I'd have nosed my way through foggy intersections, unsure if I'd find the other side. It was almost impassably dense at times, and the trip would take double the estimated time to arrive because of it. I'm often driving around 25 miles per hour or worse, trying to be safe. And it's around 1 or 2 a.m. There's no cell phone service as I get into large national forest. There's no other traffic around, there has been a little all night, so I decide to pull over to pee, leaving the engine on for whatever reason. It'd be a quick stop. I'm not fearless by any means, but I try not to let myself get too jumpy in the woods at night. But as I'm coming around the car undoing my belt, I hear voices, maybe 40 or 50 yards into the forest, and then there's a scrambling through the dead leaves and a brush coming in my direction. It's pitch black, night, no street lights or houses, national forest, cloudy, foggy, starless, moonless night. I can't see anything off of the road beyond the red glow of the taillights. Feeling sufficiently freaked out and not willing to find out more, I bolt back to the driver's side and floor it up the next hill, happy I had left my car on anyway. My heart is pounding. I never find out more about this little scare, and I'm glad for that. A little while longer, I'm heading up some steep mountains and nearing an old fire watchtower from WW2 days. There's a plaque, roughly, about it being a community morale builder to have built it even if it didn't affect the war in any way. I pulled into the overlook to actually pee because I never got the chance earlier. Now that I'm atop a sizable mountain, I suddenly get cell service and a string of concerned texts from my mom, freaking out asking if I made it okay. By this time I should have been at my house hours ago, but I took a long and unfamiliar way in the dark and intense mist. Knowing that she won't go to sleep until I'm there, because she's like that, I respond that I'm safely home, hoping that it will end it. She immediately calls and asks where I am, and I can't really ignore her call having just texted her. I tell her I'm home, and she asks, "In Virginia?" And I say, "Yeah, in my college town," despite being at the top of a mountain in a national forest in West Virginia. She sounds deeply unsettled and says she's been trying to call me repeatedly while I had no service. I ask why, and she says she got a really weird phone call from West Virginia, but way west of where you should have been, which is where I actually was. She said she got this phone call and a gruff young man in a backwoods sounding voice and was telling her he needed to speak to me and swearing at her and saying all these nasty things. She said she heard people in the background screaming and people laughing. She hung up and called me a few times, but it went straight to voicemail. She typed the number in Google and saw it was from West Virginia and knew I was at least passing through a small part of it and called the number back. Small child answered and swore at her, then the earlier voice ripped the phone back and started saying my name again, saying that he needed to speak to me. This is especially strange because I was driving my dad's car and I'm not registered to it, so even if they saw my plates somewhere and could run them, they'd get his name. I think I even paid with cash at the diner and gas station, way back near the start of the 5+ hour drive earlier and in another state. Can't think of anything I could have dropped with my name on it when I'd stepped out of the car briefly earlier during the recent incident. Still had all my cards and my ID. It would be an incredibly strange coincidence or extremely elaborate scare prank either way. I do my best to reassure my mom I have no idea what that could be about and that it must be a weird coincidence. I tell her I'm at my house and I'm okay despite how troubling I found all this in reality. She gives me a half-hearted okay and we say goodnight. Pull out of the watchtower, pull off and continue on to Virginia. Never have I been so comforted by 3 a.m. drags of late night parties, students stumbling home at a nearby university town off a highway I know well from my usual route. I carry on to that highway and make it safely, and things have been completely normal since. But I have never brought it up with my mom again, nor have I ever had the heart to tell her where I was driving that night, or how late, or of the voices in the woods. There's no climax, no resolution. Trying to forget. On my way home from a rather long trip with my mother, we got to a bridge where we saw an elderly woman in a white nightgown. Think Grandma Death Roberta Sparrow from Donnie Darko. It was fall, so rather cool, and the sun was already setting behind the trees, so the white nightgown really showed in the dark. She was just walking. Problem was that she was barefoot and completely clean, like nothing had touched her at all. We had been on this road before the bridge for at least 10 miles, and we had another 15 before we got to anything that even resembled civilization. It's the road and ample trees for miles and miles around. We stopped and asked her where she was going and if she was with anyone. Kept mumbling to herself, but I remember her eyes. Her eyes were wide as if she'd just seen something frightening. The whites of her eyes were bleached white and the pupil was straight jet black. She never made eye contact with us and just kept walking forward. We drove off and called the police. We both kept expecting her car or someone to be on the road ahead, but there was no one at all. Stuff like that doesn't happen at all there, so it was pretty startling to say the least. Very plausible that it was dementia or something along those lines, but once more, walking on foot so many miles deep on this road is just unheard of. If anything, that scared us more. I remember on a long road trip, 14+ hours, with my dad to Colorado, we saw a car barrel past us at like 100 something. Keep in mind it was about 9 o'clock and we were still hours behind schedule and had a long way to go with a short time to get there. Now it isn't odd to see bad speeders on the road, but since we were in the middle of nowhere, we had no idea where this guy came from. We continued driving for a few minutes and saw another car speed past us at about the same speed. Funny thing was, it looked like the same car, same color, same model SUV. We shrugged it off as a coincidence and continued. About the same amount of time had passed and we saw it again passing us. That time we were very sure it was the same car. This pattern continued twice more before my dad pulled off into a motel to spend the night and delay our trip. My dad is usually a very sensible person that's hard to scare, but I've never seen his face so ashen and afraid. He's never talked to me about the incident since, and doesn't allow me to drive after 9:30.